when a ruthless biker kicked a dog for fun. He was completely unaware that Keanu Reeves was the owner. What started as a peaceful afternoon walk would soon escalate into a dramatic confrontation, proving once again that you should never mess with a man's dog. The quiet hum of Brooklyn Heights was shattered by the sudden bark of Max, Keanu's pit bull. He wasn't just a dog on set, he was family. But today, he was in pain. The burly biker's boot made contact with Max's side, sending the dog tumbling into the gravel with a pained yelp. The suddenness of the attack turned the peaceful cafe into a storm of chaos. The laughter and chatter that once filled the air fell silent as everyone turned to witness the cruelty. "Hey!" Keanu's voice sliced through the tension. His posture was calm, but his eyes were burning with fury. The biker, a towering figure covered in tattoos and leather, looked down at Keanu and smirked. "What's the problem, man? It's just a dog." He laughed, his voice dripping with mockery. Keanu stood frozen for a second, the air around him thick with rising anger. The biker was oblivious to the storm he had just unleashed. He had no idea who Keanu Reeves was, or how far he would go to protect what was his. Max, disoriented and struggling to get back on his paws, gave a low growl. Keanu knelt beside the dog, gently stroking his head, trying to calm him down. "Get your hands off my dog," Keanu said through clenched teeth. His voice was low, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. The calm before the storm. The biker snorted and took a step closer, clearly not intimidated. "You going to do something about it? Tough guy." At that moment, the world around Keanu seemed to narrow. All the noise faded into the background, leaving only the biker's smirk and the discomfort of his dog. Keanu knew the danger. His military training kicked in, instinctively weighing the consequences of violence. But there was something more to this, something that went beyond the physical threat. And Keanu wasn't going to let it slide. With a deep breath, he stood tall, meeting the biker's eyes. "You don't know who you're messing with," Keanu muttered, his voice no longer a plea, but a promise. The biker's grin faltered as Keanu's calm demeanor only seemed to intensify the tension. The surrounding cafe patrons stood frozen, not sure if they should intervene or watch the unfolding drama. Keanu's eyes didn't leave the bikers, but the growl coming from Max made the situation even more dangerous. The dog, despite being hurt, stood protectively in front of Keanu, his muscles tensing in sync with his owner's. The biker, sensing that this wasn't going to be as easy as he thought, took a step back, his hand drifting towards the chain hanging from his waist. The action was subtle, but the crowd could feel the threat hanging in the air like a storm cloud. "You really want to play it this way? Ha!" The biker's voice was laced with mockery, but the uncertainty in his eyes betrayed his bravado. He didn't know who he was dealing with, and that was his mistake. Keanu's pulse quickened, but he didn't move an inch. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his movements deliberate, measured. His mind flashed back to the countless hours spent in training, preparing for moments like this, when confrontation was inevitable but control was key. He knew the biker was baiting him, hoping to provoke a fight. But Keanu wasn't just some film star. He had been through far worse. And today, it wasn't about pride, it was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. "Max didn't do anything to you," Keanu said, his voice as cold as the metal chains hanging from the biker's waist. "But you hurt him, and that's a mistake." The biker chuckled, his hand tightening around the chain. "You think you scare me, pretty boy? I've fought guys bigger than you." He took another step forward, chest puffed out, trying to intimidate Keanu. The crowd, sensing the imminent danger, began to back away, giving the two men space. But Keanu didn't flinch. His body remained still, his eyes locked onto the bikers. A calmness washed over him, like the eye of a hurricane. There was no turning back now. This wasn't about a fight. This was about justice, about making sure no one got away with harming those who didn't deserve it. "I'm not here to fight you," Keanu said slowly, each word deliberate, measured. "I'm here to stop you from hurting anyone else." His voice was steady, but there was an underlying force to it that cut through the biker's bravado. "You touch my dog again, and I won't let it slide. Do you understand me?" For a moment, there was silence. The biker hesitated, his hand still wrapped around the chain. But his confidence was slipping. The crowd could feel it too. The moment was shifting. This wasn't the outcome he had expected. The biker had wanted a fight, but Keanu had turned the tables, showing him that the true strength wasn't in brute force, but in knowing when to stand firm and when to hold back. Before the biker could respond, a voice cut through the air, louder than the tension building around them. "You heard the man. Leave him alone." It was Sarah, the waitress from the cafe. She stepped forward, her eyes flashing with a mixture of fear and defiance. She had seen enough of these bikers bullying the regulars, enough of their threats and intimidation. But seeing Keanu stand up like this, calm, controlled, gave her the courage to speak out. She had seen the way Keanu had cared for his dog, how his demeanor softened when he spoke to Max, and she knew, deep down, he wasn't just any man. The biker turned toward her, sneering. "And what are you going to do about it, sweetheart?" He spat. But Sarah didn't back down. She was tired of watching these bikers push people around. And today, she had had enough. Keanu shot her a quick glance, a silent nod of thanks. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, even if the world seemed to be watching, waiting for something to break. The biker, now realizing he was alone in his stance, looked around at the people who had begun to gather their things, slowly backing away. He wasn't just confronting Keanu. He was facing an entire community that had had enough of his intimidation. He was outnumbered in more ways than one. A long, tense moment passed. Then, with a final scowl, the biker muttered under his breath, "This isn't over." But Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't have to. As the biker turned and walked away, the crowd exhaled collectively. Keanu crouched down beside Max, who was still wary, still feeling the effects of the attack. He stroked the dog's fur, murmuring soft words of reassurance. "It's okay, buddy," he said, his voice gentle. "You're safe now." The crowd dispersed, whispers of the encounter following them as they went. Some of them cast lingering glances back at Keanu, wondering if they had just witnessed something they couldn't quite explain. But for Keanu, there was no mystery. He had done what needed to be done, and he would continue to protect what mattered most. As the bikers disappeared into the distance, Keanu knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, he could breathe, knowing that today, he had stood his ground. Not just for Max, but for everything he believed in. And he would keep standing, no matter what came next. With a final glance over his shoulder at the retreating bikers, Keanu turned and began walking, Max trotting faithfully by his side. The afternoon had shifted from peaceful to tense. But one thing was certain: Keanu would never back down. Not when it came to protecting his dog. The streets of Brooklyn Heights seemed quieter now, the world returning to its pace. But Keanu knew, deep down, that the storm was only just beginning. Keanu continued walking down the quiet streets, Max faithfully trotting beside him. The tension that had gripped the cafe still lingered in the air, but Keanu didn't let it settle in his bones. His mind raced, but he kept his focus on the task at hand, getting Max to safety, making sure the dog was all right after the attack. They reached a nearby park, its trees providing a welcome respite from the harsh sun. Keanu knelt down, checking Max over. The dog seemed fine now, though a little shaken, his tail wagging gently as Keanu ran his fingers through the dog's fur. The bond they shared was unspoken but deep. Keanu had always been someone who preferred solitude, who'd found comfort in quiet moments and the simplicity of being with animals. But now, more than ever, he felt a responsibility that went beyond just caring for Max. He felt the weight of protecting what mattered in a world that didn't always seem kind. Max looked up at him, his eyes full of trust, and Keanu smiled softly. "You're tough, buddy. I'm proud of you." But even as Keanu whispered those words, He couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. The bikers, their actions, their attitude, it wasn't just a random encounter. There was something more behind it. The thought gnawed at him, and he knew it wouldn't be long before they came back, angrier and more dangerous than before. As he stood up, Keanu glanced around the park. People were out enjoying the day, walking their dogs, sitting on benches, chatting casually. Everything looked normal, peaceful. But Keanu knew better. He couldn't just walk away. Not after what had happened. He had been in situations like this before, situations where the threat wasn't always obvious, where the danger lurked just beneath the surface. And now, with the bikers still out there, he wasn't going to take any chances. Max, sensing his unease, let out a small whine and nuzzled his leg. Keanu looked down at him, a silent promise passing between them. "Don't worry, I won't let anything happen to you." As he walked away from the park, heading back toward the cafe, Keanu's thoughts drifted to the encounter with the bikers. He had made a statement today, one that had been as much for them as for himself. He had shown that there were consequences to their actions. But now, he needed more than just a quick resolution. He needed to know who these men were, what they were really after. Keanu stopped at a corner and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number he knew all too well, a name he hadn't called in years, but one that had never been far from his mind. "Hey, Hank," Keanu said when the phone picked up. "I need a favor. It's about some bikers causing trouble around here. I think they're involved in something bigger, and I need you to look into it." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Sheriff Hank Morrison's voice came through, calm but with an edge. "Keanu, you know I've got your back. I'll see what I can dig up. But you need to stay low. These guys aren't just some random punks. They're connected." Keanu clenched his jaw at the mention of connections. "I figured as much. Just find out who they are. And keep me posted." "Will do," Hank replied. "Stay safe, Keanu. And don't do anything stupid." Keanu hung up the phone and slipped it back into his jacket. The sheriff was right. This wasn't over. And Keanu knew that he had to stay ahead of it, because if he didn't, things could escalate quickly. As he walked, Keanu's thoughts remained focused. He couldn't afford to let the bikers slip through his fingers. Not when they had already shown what they were capable of. But more than that, Keanu had something to prove. He had always believed in fairness, in doing what was right. But today, with Max by his side, he realized just how far he was willing to go for that belief. With a steady breath, Keanu reached the cafe again. The place was quieter now, the earlier chaos having settled into an uneasy calm. But Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. As he stepped inside, the barista behind the counter gave him a small nod. "Everything okay?" she asked. Keanu looked at her and offered a small, reassuring smile. "For now, but I think I need to keep an eye on things." He walked past the counter and out the back door, his senses alert. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Keanu couldn't help but feel that something was brewing just beyond the horizon. Max barked softly as they moved through the alley behind the cafe. Keanu reached down, giving the dog's head a quick pat. "We'll get through this, buddy." And as the last rays of daylight faded, Keanu couldn't help but wonder how far he'd have to go to stop the bikers from doing any more damage. The city around him buzzed with the usual sounds of evening life. But Keanu knew that under the surface, the real battle was just beginning. He had been calm before, but now, there was a fire within him, a fire that would burn until justice was done. The next move would be his. Keanu paced slowly back to the front of the cafe, his eyes scanning the street, alert for anything unusual. Max was walking beside him, sensing his tension. His usual carefree demeanor replaced by a quiet understanding that something was off. The dog's ears perked up at every noise, as if he too was waiting for the next thing to happen. The night had begun to settle in, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. Keanu knew he couldn't afford to wait much longer. The bikers had shown they were willing to escalate their actions. And if they weren't dealt with soon, it would only get worse. He walked with purpose, knowing exactly where to go next. The bikers' territory was a few blocks away, an old warehouse district near the waterfront that had long been abandoned. It was a place where trouble thrived, where the law turned a blind eye, and where men like the bikers could hide in plain sight. But tonight, Keanu wasn't looking to hide. He wasn't going in guns blazing. He had no intention of starting a full-blown war. But he had something the bikers didn't: a clear goal and the resolve to see it through. Max trotted ahead of him as they reached the edge of the district. The smell of salt water mixed with the faint, acrid scent of gasoline. The sounds of the city, once loud and bustling, grew distant, replaced by the low hum of the wind and the occasional screech of metal. Keanu's eyes narrowed as he passed an alleyway, the faint silhouette of a bike visible in the dim light. The bikers were here. It was only a matter of time before they realized Keanu was too. He found a spot near the old warehouse where he could keep watch without being seen. A narrow gap between two crumbling buildings that gave him a perfect view of the parking lot. A handful of bikes were parked near the warehouse door, their riders milling about, laughing and drinking. It was clear they weren't expecting any trouble. They thought they had control. Keanu's hand rested on Max's head, stroking his fur lightly. The dog had stopped barking, sensing that his owner was deep in thought. Keanu knew this wasn't just about standing up to the bikers anymore. It was about stopping them from hurting anyone else. He had to make sure that whatever they were planning next didn't get off the ground. He checked his watch. It was late, and most of the surrounding businesses were closed. Perfect. This was his chance. But first, he needed to find out more about their operations. If he was going to take them down, he had to understand how they worked. He needed leverage, something he could use to make them back off before things got out of hand. Keanu signaled to Max to stay low as he moved quietly toward the entrance of the warehouse. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows across the cracked concrete, making the place look like a set from one of his own movies. The silence was deafening, only broken by the occasional clink of glass and the sound of boots shuffling across the ground. He crouched low, his heart steady as he focused on the voices ahead. As he crept closer, he could hear snippets of conversation. The bikers were talking shop, nothing out of the ordinary at first, just casual banter. But then, he overheard something that made his blood run cold. They've been talking about moving bigger shipments soon. Word is the boss wants to expand the operation into the city. We need to show some muscle before that happens. One of them said. Keanu's mind raced. He had suspected it. But hearing the confirmation made it real. These bikers weren't just bullies. They were involved in something much darker. Drugs. Maybe weapons. The threat was bigger than just one confrontation. It was about control of the streets, about threatening the community they were supposed to protect. Another biker laughed. I heard the new kid's been selling out of the back of the bar. They think the cops won't notice. But I got a buddy on the inside. Keanu felt a surge of anger, but he kept it contained. He couldn't let them know he was here yet. He had to stay calm, be smart. He had enough information now. The bikers were planning something big, and Keanu knew he had to stop it before they could put it into motion. He backed away quietly, his mind racing. The police would need to be involved, but he had to handle this carefully. If he tipped them off too soon, everything could fall apart. The last thing he wanted was to risk Max's safety or the people who lived in the neighborhood. Max's low growl snapped Keanu out of his thoughts. He looked down to see the dog's eyes fixed on something in the distance. Keanu's heart skipped a beat. The bikers were getting ready to move. Without wasting another second, he made his move. He signaled to Max to stay close and slowly slipped behind a stack of crates, moving as quietly as he could. He needed to get to the front, to cut them off before they could leave. As he moved through the shadows, Keanu's mind was clear. He wasn't just taking a stand anymore. He was becoming part of the solution. And tonight, he wasn't going to let these men get away with it. He found his moment when the last biker walked toward his bike. keys dangling from his hand. The others had started their engines, their loud roar reverberating through the night air. Keanu's heart pounded in his chest as he made his way to the biker closest to him. He didn't need to say a word. The confrontation wasn't going to be with his fists, it was going to be with his resolve. As Keanu stepped into the light, the biker froze, his eyes locked with Keanu's, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Max stood beside him, growling low, and Keanu stood tall, his expression unwavering. "You've made a mistake," Keanu said, his voice low but firm. The biker hesitated, but then a sneer crossed his face. "What's your problem, man? You think you can just come here and—" "I'm here to stop you," Keanu interrupted, his tone unyielding. "And if you don't walk away, you're going to regret it." The biker stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "And what? You think you can take all of us on?" Keanu didn't flinch. "I don't need to, but I will." And just like that, the game had changed. The stakes were higher now, and Keanu was ready to see it through, no matter the cost. The biker took another step forward, his face twisted in a mocking grin. The sound of engines revving in the distance grew louder. The other bikers unaware of the tension that was building between their comrade and Keanu. Max stood at Keanu's side, his body taut, ready to spring into action if necessary. Keanu's calm demeanor never wavered. His eyes remained locked on the bikers, unwavering, determined. "You think you can stop us?" The biker sneered, his hand tightening around the handlebar of his bike. "You're just some Hollywood actor, man. What do you know about real power?" Keanu's jaw tightened. "I know enough to recognize when things have gone too far. And you're not the kind of people I let walk around without consequences." The biker chuckled darkly, clearly underestimating Keanu's resolve. He reached for the chain hanging from his waist, swinging it in a threatening arc. The sharp metallic sound sliced through the air, echoing off the walls of the warehouse district. Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step forward, his voice steady. "You don't have to do this. You can walk away now and save yourself a lot of trouble." The biker stopped swinging the chain, eyeing Keanu with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "You must be out of your mind, thinking you can intimidate me with words. This is our turf. You're just passing through." Keanu took another step, closing the distance between them. The air between them crackled with tension. "You're wrong. This is everyone's turf. And you're not welcome here anymore." The biker's eyes darkened, his expression changing from arrogance to something colder. He let the chain fall to his side and cracked his knuckles. "You're making a mistake, pal. You'll regret this." The bikers were now starting to take notice. The engines stilled, and a few of them turned their heads in Keanu's direction. The group was starting to sense that things were about to escalate. Keanu's focus never shifted from the biker in front of him. His mind was clear, calm. He had seen enough violence in his past to know that it was a road with no easy end. But he wasn't going to let these men ruin the peace of this neighborhood, or hurt anyone else. Not while he could still do something about it. "Not if you walk away," Keanu said, his voice low but firm. "But if you stay, we'll find out how far you're willing to go to keep it." The biker glared at him, his face twitching with a mix of anger and uncertainty. He had a crew, but Keanu wasn't backing down. He was standing tall, unshaken, and that unflinching resolve was starting to chip away at the biker's bravado. The group of men started to gather behind their leader, but they seemed hesitant now, unsure of what was coming next. Max growled softly, sensing his owner's energy, his protective instincts kicking in. Keanu placed a hand on the dog's back, his fingers brushing through the soft fur, reassuring him without a word. This wasn't the moment for a fight. Not yet. Keanu was trying to talk them down, but he was ready for whatever happened next. The silence stretched between them, thick with the tension of unspoken threats. The biker finally took a step back, his eyes darting to his friends behind him. He opened his mouth, ready to respond. But before he could say anything, a voice from the darkness interrupted. You think you're the only ones with power around here? It was a voice Keanu didn't recognize, but it carried authority. Out of the shadows, a tall figure stepped forward, flanked by two others, all dressed in similar leather vests with the unmistakable insignia of a different crew. Keanu's eyes narrowed. These weren't just any bikers. This wasn't the same group. The first biker, the one who had been confronting Keanu, turned quickly, his earlier arrogance replaced by a wary unease. "Boss, I didn't know you were coming." The man who stepped out of the shadows, tall, muscular, and with a cold, calculating look in his eyes, glanced at Keanu with a quick assessment before turning back to the group. "I heard a lot of talk about some new blood around here. What the hell's going on?" The first biker fumbled with his words, clearly nervous. "Just a misunderstanding, boss. This guy's causing trouble, he—" The man cut him off, his tone sharp. "I don't care about your little squabbles, but I do care about keeping a low profile. We don't need some outsider stirring things up." Keanu's heart rate quickened. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the opportunity to get to the heart of the operation. He wasn't just dealing with street thugs anymore. He was facing a whole system, a network that ran deep, one that had its fingers in too many pies. And now, he had to make them realize that messing with the wrong person had consequences. He took a step forward, this time with more confidence, more authority. "I'm not here to stir anything up. I'm here to make sure this ends before anyone else gets hurt." The boss looked at him, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You're Keanu Reeves, aren't you? The actor." Keanu didn't hesitate. "I'm not just an actor. I'm a man who doesn't let people like you hurt the people who don't have a voice." His voice was calm, but the weight of his words carried more power than anything else. The boss studied him for a moment, eyes narrowing. "So, what's your play, tough guy? You think you can just walk in here and tell us to pack up and leave?" Keanu's eyes were unwavering. "You don't get to run things here anymore. Not after what you did today." The boss smirked, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. He looked at his men, each of them weighing their options. The sound of a siren wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The boss's face shifted from bravado to a tense caution. "Looks like we're out of time," Keanu said, his voice low and cold. The bikers, realizing their position was no longer as secure as they thought, began to look uneasy. Keanu had already called in the backup. The game had changed, and they knew it. The police were on their way, and the window for escape was closing fast. The boss turned, his face contorted with frustration, and motioned for his men to get on their bikes. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, before gesturing to his crew to leave. As the engines roared to life and the bikers sped off into the night, Keanu stood still, his eyes following their retreating figures. He had done it. He had stopped them for now. But he knew it wouldn't be the last time they'd come after him. Turning back to Max, Keanu's side, a small smile breaking through the tension. "We're not done yet, buddy," he said quietly, rubbing the dog's head. "But for now, we can rest." They walked back toward the city, the distant sound of sirens fading into the background. The battle wasn't over, but Keanu knew that tonight. He had taken the first step in protecting the people and the streets that mattered most to him. And whatever came next, he'd be ready. Keanu and Max walked through the quiet streets, the tension of the night still lingering in the air. The bikers had retreated for now, but Keanu knew that this brief victory was only the beginning. As they moved through the shadowed alleys and dimly lit corners of Brooklyn Heights, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that the world was shifting, that something bigger was at play. Max padded silently by his side, his pace slow but steady. The dog's presence was comforting, a reminder of what was truly important in the midst of the chaos. Keanu reached down to give him a reassuring pat, feeling the warmth of the dog's fur beneath his fingers. It was moments like these that reminded him of the simple truths in life, the quiet moments of companionship, the bonds forged through shared experience. But as Keanu walked, his thoughts were far from peaceful. The biker gang he had just confronted was only one part of a much larger web of criminal activity in the city. What they had planned wasn't just about drugs or intimidation. It was about control, about asserting dominance over a neighborhood, over people who had no other choice but to bend to their will. And Keanu knew that if he didn't act soon, this power grab would spread even further, threatening everything he cared about. When he reached his building, Keanu paused for a moment, his hand on the door handle. He looked down at Max, who looked up at him, his eyes calm, trusting. Keanu smiled faintly, a brief flicker of warmth in an otherwise cold world. "You're right, buddy," he said softly. "Time to rest, but we'll be back at it tomorrow." They entered the building, the cool air of the lobby offering a brief respite from the weight of the world outside. Keanu made his way to the elevator, pressing the button with a weary finger. The building was quiet, too quiet for Keanu's liking. It was almost as if the whole city was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and Keanu stepped inside, Max following close behind. As the doors closed, Keanu glanced at the reflection in the mirrored wall. His face was tired, his eyes hard with the weight of the night's events. But there was something else there too, something burning deep inside him, a fire that hadn't been there before. He was no longer just an actor in a world of make-believe. He was someone who had seen the underbelly of the world and had chosen to fight for what was right. The realization settled over him like a heavy cloak. And for the first time in a long time, he knew exactly who he was meant to be. The elevator dinged again, and the doors opened to his floor. He stepped out into the hallway, his mind still reeling from everything that had transpired. But as he walked down the corridor, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw an incoming message from Sheriff Hank Morrison. "I've got the info you asked for. You were right, this gang is just the tip of the iceberg. They've been working with some pretty dangerous people. I've already contacted a few of my contacts, but we need to move fast." Keanu's pulse quickened. This was it, the tipping point. He wasn't just facing a few rogue bikers anymore. This was a full-fledged criminal network, and it was only a matter of time before it would move again. He typed back quickly, his fingers moving with a sense of urgency. "Thanks, Hank. I'll be ready. Let's meet tomorrow morning. We need to take them down before they can do any more damage." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned to Max. The dog sat patiently by the door, looking up at him with those trusting eyes. Keanu crouched down, giving him another pat. "We've got a long road ahead of us, buddy, but we're in this together." He opened the door to his apartment and stepped inside. The silence of the space enveloping him. The city outside seemed so distant, so removed from the struggle he was about to face. Keanu set his keys on the counter and went to the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of water. He drank deeply, feeling the cool liquid wash over him. But it didn't bring the relief he sought. Max padded over to his side, nuzzling his leg, and Keanu couldn't help but smile. In this quiet moment, the world outside seemed miles away. For a brief second, Keanu allowed himself to let go of the weight of the day, but only for a second. As he sat down at the table, his mind wandered back to the bikers, their threats, their arrogance. He knew they weren't done. They would be back. And when they did, they would be ready. But so would he. The next morning came too quickly. Keanu barely slept, his thoughts constantly racing. He had prepared for moments like this, but nothing could prepare him for the battle ahead. As he got dressed, pulling on a black jacket and lacing up his boots, he knew that today was the day the real fight would begin. He glanced over at Max, who was curled up on the couch, watching him with those steady eyes. "Ready, buddy?" Keanu asked quietly. Max lifted his head, his tail thumping against the couch as if to answer. Keanu grabbed his keys and headed out the door. The sun was rising over the skyline, casting long shadows across the city. The streets were coming to life, but Keanu couldn't afford to get distracted. His mission was clear now, to dismantle the bikers' operation before they could spread their poison any further. He wasn't just fighting for justice anymore, He was fighting for the soul of the city, for the people who couldn't protect themselves. As he stepped into the elevator, he felt the weight of the mission ahead of him. The path was clear, but it would be dangerous, and Keanu knew that nothing in this world came without a cost. But he was ready, for Max, for the city, and for himself. Today, the fight would start in earnest, and Keanu would not back down. Keanu stood at the edge of the street, watching as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The city was waking up, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The morning air was cool, carrying with it the scent of fresh coffee and the distant hum of traffic. It was a typical Brooklyn morning, but for Keanu, felt like the calm before the storm. Max stood beside him, alert, his muscles taut. The dog had always been a good judge of character, and today, Keanu could sense that Max understood what was at stake. They had been through a lot together, and now they were facing something bigger than either of them had anticipated. Keanu took a deep breath and adjusted the collar of his jacket. His mind focused. He had a plan, and it wasn't a half-baked one. Hank had sent him the intel he needed, but the more Keanu thought about it, the more he realized this was no ordinary gang. The bikers weren't just causing trouble, they were connected to something much darker. A network of criminals, corrupt officials, and drug dealers, and now, it was his job to take them down before they could do any more damage. He glanced at his phone, seeing a message from Hank. "We've got eyes on their warehouse. They're gearing up for something big. We need to hit them fast. Get here as soon as you can." Keanu didn't hesitate. This was it. There was no time to waste. He turned to Max. "Let's go, buddy." They made their way down the street, weaving through the early morning crowd. Keanu's mind was sharp, focused on the task at hand. He had no illusions about the danger they were walking into. This wasn't just about stopping a few troublemakers. This was about bringing down an entire operation. And it wasn't going to be easy. When they arrived at Hank's location, a small, inconspicuous office on the outskirts of the city, Keanu was greeted by the sheriff, who was standing next to a stack of files and a map spread out on the table. Hank's face was grim, his usually easygoing demeanor replaced by the seriousness of the situation. "You ready for this?" Hank asked, his voice low. Keanu nodded, his jaw set. "Let's do it." The plan was simple. Hit the warehouse while the bikers were still preparing. Keanu knew that if they waited too long, the gang would be gone before they could make a move. They needed to move quickly, strike with precision, and get out before things got messy. Hank handed Keanu a pair of earplugs and a tactical vest. "We've got backup, but this has to be fast. We can't afford a full-blown shootout." Keanu took the gear, his eyes never leaving the map. "I'll make sure of it." With everything in place, they set off. The warehouse was located near the docks, a place where deals were made in the dead of night and the stench of saltwater mixed with the pungent smell of oil and rust. The closer they got, the heavier the atmosphere became. It wasn't just the weight of the mission, it was the knowledge that whatever happened here would change everything. Keanu had already made the decision to do whatever it took. But he knew that stepping into that warehouse would be a point of no return. They parked a few blocks away, out of sight. Keanu and Hank moved quietly through the streets, their footsteps muffled by the fog that had settled over the city. Max stayed close to Keanu, his eyes scanning the area, ears perked at every sound. They made their way to the back of the warehouse, where a small entrance was guarded by a few low-level thugs. They didn't seem to notice them approaching, too focused on their own conversation. Keanu and Hank exchanged a quick look. It was time to move. Hank took the lead, slipping behind one of the guards and knocking him out with a swift strike. Keanu followed suit, taking the other guard by surprise. They were in. The warehouse was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of industrial chemicals and machinery. The sounds of motorcycles revving could be heard in the distance, a reminder that they were on borrowed time. They crept through the narrow hallways, staying low, eyes scanning for any signs of movement. The layout was familiar from the maps Hank had shared. They were heading toward the main area, where the gang was likely gearing up for their next big move. Keanu's heart beat faster as they neared the warehouse's main floor. The sound of shouting and laughter echoed through the walls. He signaled to Hank to stay back, then moved in closer, peeking around the corner. The bikers were gathered around a set of crates, unloading what looked like weapons and stacks of cash. This was it. This was what they had been preparing for. Keanu's fingers tightened around the grip of the gun he had holstered at his side. He wasn't here to make a spectacle. He wasn't here to be a hero. He was here to stop them before they could hurt anyone else. He signaled to Hank, who moved into position. Keanu stepped into the room, his voice steady as he called out, "You've all been making a lot of noise around here, but it ends now." The bikers froze, their heads snapping toward him. The room went silent. For a moment, felt like time had stopped. Then the leader of the gang, a tall, muscular man with a scar running down his cheek, took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're making a big mistake, pal," he growled, his voice dripping with menace. "This is our turf. You have no idea what you're up against." Keanu didn't flinch. "I'm not here to talk." Without a word, Hank moved in, and the room exploded into chaos. The bikers reached for their weapons, but Keanu and Hank were faster. The sound of gunfire rang out, sharp and sudden, but it was over quickly. The bikers were subdued, most of them on the ground, handcuffed and restrained. As the last of the bikers was taken into custody, Keanu exhaled, his body finally relaxing after the adrenaline-fueled moments. The danger was over for now. He turned to Hank, who was surveying the scene with a nod of approval. "It's done," Keanu said quietly. "Yeah," Hank replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "For now." Keanu looked down at Max, who was sitting calmly by his side, as if he hadn't just witnessed a full-blown takedown. The dog's calm demeanor reminded Keanu that they still had a long road ahead of them, but for tonight, they had made a difference. As they walked out of the warehouse, the sun had fully risen, and the city was waking up to a new day. Keanu knew there would be more battles to fight, more challenges to face, but today, they had won, and that was enough. He patted Max on the head. "You did good, buddy." And with that, they disappeared into the morning light, ready for whatever came next. Keanu and Max walked through the streets of Brooklyn, the world around them still buzzing with the quiet hum of a city that was just waking up. The events of the night felt like a distant memory now, as if they had happened in another life. But Keanu knew better than to let his guard down. The bikers were off the streets for now, but the sense of unfinished business lingered in the air like a storm that hadn't quite passed. The streets were quieter than usual, the typical hustle and bustle of the city still a few hours away. Keanu appreciated the silence, the calm before what he knew would inevitably come. He was still processing everything that had happened, the raid on the warehouse, the confrontation with the bikers, the weight of the decisions he'd made. But one thing was certain: they were not done yet. Keanu's phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the stillness of the moment. He pulled it out, seeing a message from Hank. "They're regrouping. We've got intel that they're planning something big. We need to move fast. Meet me at the precinct." Keanu's eyes narrowed. This was it, the calm before the next wave. The bikers weren't going to just fade away. He knew that. They'd been too organized, too brazen. This wasn't just about power, it was about control. And Keanu wasn't going to let them take it any further. He glanced down at Max, who was walking beside him, head held high, tail swaying with each step. The dog's calm demeanor reminded Keanu of the simple things in life. Max was his anchor in a world that often felt out of control. But today, Keanu knew that he had to be the one to make sure they didn't spiral any further. "Let's go, buddy," Keanu muttered, more to himself than to Max. "We've got work to do." They made their way to the precinct, the streets beginning to wake up as the first few cars passed them by. Keanu's mind was focused on the task ahead. He knew the bikers wouldn't make it easy, but Keanu had seen worse. and he was ready for whatever came next. When they arrived at the precinct, Hank was already there, waiting. His face was grim, a sense of urgency in the air. As soon as Keanu walked in, Hank looked up, nodding in acknowledgement. "Glad you're here," he said, his voice low. "We've got a bigger problem than we thought. The bikers are just the beginning." Keanu nodded, his focus sharp. "What do you mean?" "The gang's connected to a larger syndicate. The warehouse we hit last night, it wasn't just a drug operation. It was a distribution center for weapons, too. And it's not just local, they've got their hands in multiple cities. We're talking international connections. Keanu, this is bigger than we realized." Keanu's blood ran cold. He had known there was more to this than just street-level violence. But hearing Hank's words confirmed it. This was a whole network of criminals, and they were operating right under everyone's noses. The implications were staggering. "We need to hit them before they can go underground," Hank continued, his eyes locked onto Keanu's. "We've got one shot at this. The next move is critical." Keanu didn't need to be told twice. He was already processing the next steps, running through scenarios in his head. This wasn't just about stopping a few thugs. This was about dismantling a global operation, cutting off the head of a snake before it could grow any larger. Max, as if sensing the gravity of the situation, sat quietly beside Keanu, his gaze focused and unwavering. Keanu reached down and gave the dog a quick pat. "We're going to need to be sharp, buddy. This isn't going to be easy." Hank motioned to the map laid out on the table. "We've traced their movement. The main operation is being run out of a shipping port nearby. They're moving goods, guns, drugs, you name it, under the radar. If we hit them now, we can shut it all down before they can flee." Keanu's mind was already racing, thinking about the layout, the best way to get in and out without drawing too much attention. He couldn't afford another drawn-out battle. They had to strike fast. "I'll take care of the inside," Keanu said, his voice calm, but there was a hardness to it now. "You get the perimeter. We need to box them in before they can run." Hank nodded, his jaw set. "You're the one who knows how to get it done. Just make sure we don't lose them." Keanu turned to Max, his voice softer now. "You ready, boy?" Max's tail thumped twice against the floor. Keanu smiled, then turned back to Hank. "Let's go." The drive to the shipping port was quick. As the sun continued to rise, Keanu felt the weight of the moment settle on him. This wasn't just about taking down a gang. This was about protecting the community, keeping the people safe, and stopping a tide of violence that had been allowed to grow unchecked for far too long. They arrived at the port, the sound of distant ships and the hum of machinery creating an eerie background to the tense silence of their approach. Keanu could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He was ready for whatever came next. They parked at a safe distance and crept through the shadows, making their way to the shipping containers where the operation was taking place. The air was thick with the smell of salt and metal, the sound of the ocean crashing against the docks only adding to the tense atmosphere. Keanu and Hank moved silently, their footsteps muffled by the thick fog rolling in from the water. The first sign of trouble came when they spotted two guards near a stack of containers. Keanu signaled for Hank to hold back while he moved forward, silently approaching the guards from behind. In one swift motion, he incapacitated them both, dragging their unconscious bodies into the shadows before moving on. They reached the main area of the operation without incident. But the sight that greeted them was worse than they had imagined. Dozens of crates, stacked high with weapons, drugs, and stolen goods, were being prepared for shipment. The bikers were there, overseeing the operation, clearly unaware that Keanu and Hank had infiltrated their territory. Keanu signaled for Hank to take cover, then stepped forward, his voice cold and firm. "This ends now." The bikers turned, shocked at the sudden intrusion. A few reached for their weapons, but Keanu was faster. He took them down one by one, his movements calculated and precise. The others hesitated, unsure of what to do. They had seen the power Keanu wielded, the authority in his every move. As the last of the bikers fell, Keanu surveyed the area. They had done it, they had taken down the operation. But it was clear that there was still work to be done. The syndicate would regroup. But for now, they had delivered a blow that would ripple through their entire network. Keanu walked over to Max, who had been watching patiently from a safe distance. He patted the dog's head, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. "We did good, buddy." Hank approached, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "That's one for the books." Keanu nodded, his expression serious. "We've made a dent, but this isn't over. They'll be back. And next time, we need to be ready." The sun had risen fully now, casting light over the port. Keanu knew that the road ahead would be long. But for now, they had won. And in a world like this, that was enough. Together, Keanu and Max walked back into the fog, ready for whatever came next. Keanu stood at the edge of the port, his eyes scanning the now quiet scene. The sounds of the ocean were more calming now, but the weight of the battle still lingered. The bikers were subdued, their operation dismantled for the time being. But Keanu knew this was far from over. The quiet that surrounded them felt deceptive, like the calm before the storm. He glanced down at Max, who sat calmly by his side, seemingly unaffected by the chaos. The dog had been through it all, just as Keanu had. Max had been his anchor, his reminder of the importance of loyalty, of doing what was right, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. Keanu's thoughts were interrupted by Hank, who walked up beside him, wiping his brow. "You know, I thought we might actually make it out of here without a fight," Hank said with a half laugh, but his face was serious. Keanu didn't respond right away. He was still processing everything: the raid, the bikers, the weapons and drugs they had seized. This wasn't just about one gang anymore. It was a global operation, and they had only scratched the surface. The men they'd taken down tonight were just pawns in a much larger game. "We've made a dent," Keanu finally said, his voice steady. "But they won't stop. This is just one battle. The war is still going." Hank nodded, his expression grim. "I know. The whole thing goes deeper than we thought. The connections, they go far. We've got to keep pushing." Keanu didn't argue. He understood the stakes. He had seen enough of the world to know that sometimes one small victory wasn't enough to change anything. But it was a start. And as long as there was a fight left in him, he would keep going. "We'll need more than just us to take this down," Keanu said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We'll need backup. We'll need the right people in the right places. This is going to get worse before it gets better." Hank looked at him, reading the unspoken message. "We'll get them. We've got the intel now. This isn't over for them. Not by a long shot. But we'll bring them down." Keanu nodded, but there was something more pressing on his mind. He couldn't help but think about the people in this city, the ones who didn't have the strength or the resources to stand up to men like the bikers, the victims of the syndicate who wouldn't even know what hit them until it was too late. "How many more people are they hurting?" Keanu asked, his voice low. "How many people are still trapped in this?" Hank's expression softened, the weight of the question heavy on his shoulders. "Too many. But that's why we're doing this. We're not just stopping these guys. We're protecting the city. We're giving people a chance." Keanu looked at Hank for a long moment. There was a sense of solidarity there, something that told him they were in this together no matter what came next. They had already crossed a line, and now they couldn't stop. They couldn't let the cycle of violence continue. "Let's finish it, then," Keanu said, his voice resolute. And with that, the two men turned back toward their vehicles, the quiet hum of the city's awakening streets filling the air around them. Keanu and Hank were walking toward an uncertain future. But one thing was clear: they weren't going to stop until they had put an end to the criminal empire threatening the city. Max trotted alongside them, steady and faithful. Together, they were ready for whatever the future held. The road ahead would be long, and there would be more challenges, more threats, and more danger. But for Keanu, This wasn't just about taking down bad guys. It was about protecting the people he cared about and doing what was right, no matter the cost. As they drove into the city, Keanu felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from victory, it was the kind that came from knowing that, despite everything, he had made a difference. And as long as there was still a fight left, he would keep fighting. For Max, for the city, for the people who needed him. And so, the fight continued. The battle wasn't over yet, but Keanu was ready. He had a mission to finish. And nothing, no gang, no criminal empire would stop him from seeing it through to the end. Keanu and Max walked silently through the streets, the fading light of day casting a warm golden hue over Brooklyn. They had just fought a big battle. But Keanu knew this was only the beginning. Though they had brought down the criminals for now, there was still an underlying sense of unease. The battle might be over, but the war wasn't. Max walked faithfully by his side, his steady presence a constant reminder that Keanu was not alone in this fight. The dog's calm demeanor spoke volumes of his loyalty, but Keanu understood that the true danger was far from gone. The world was still full of shadows waiting to resurface. "We did good, buddy," Keanu whispered, gently patting Max's head. But even as he spoke, his mind was already on the road ahead. But this fight isn't over. They continued their walk, the cool evening air brushing past them. The streets were just starting to come to life. But Keanu knew better than to relax. He had made a difference today. But there were still forces in the city, and beyond that would stop at nothing to maintain control. The syndicate wasn't done with them, and Keanu was ready to face whatever came next. As they reached his building, Keanu paused, looking up at the city skyline. The lights of the city blinked on, signaling the start of another night. He knew there would be more battles ahead, more choices to make. But in this moment, he had done what he had set out to do. He had protected those who couldn't protect themselves. Max looked up at him, as if understanding. They had come a long way together. The journey wasn't over, and neither was Keanu's mission. But for now, they had won. "Let's get some rest, buddy," Keanu said softly. "Tomorrow, we'll be ready for whatever comes next." As they entered the building, Keanu couldn't help but feel the weight of the world lifting. Even if just for a moment, he had fought for something more than just justice. He had fought for hope, for the people who still believed that one person could make a difference. And as the night settled over the city, Keanu knew that, no matter how dark it got, he would always stand ready to face whatever was coming. If you've enjoyed this journey with Keanu and Max, make sure to subscribe to Tapestry of Worlds and never miss another chapter in their story. Join us as we continue to explore new worlds, face fresh challenges, and uncover the unexpected, because the adventure is just beginning.